The wind screamed through the narrow street like it carried the ghosts of the past. Snowflakes tumbled wildly in the dark, swirling under the flickering streetlight across from Emily Carter's apartment. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window, watching the storm rage, the city wrapped in a kind of silence only heavy snow could bring. Inside, the air smelled faintly of chamomile tea, a half-finished mug sitting on the counter. Bills lay scattered on the small kitchen table, unpaid rent, hospital notices, and a final reminder from the electricity company. Her mother's medication sat neatly in their pill organizer, a constant reminder of how fragile everything in Emily's life had become. She had lost her job just 2 weeks ago. The layoff email had been short, impersonal, almost surgical in the way it stripped her of security. Since then, she had been sending out resumes into the void, the silence after each application heavier than the last. Tonight, she had planned to simply wrap herself in a blanket, keep the heater low to save power, and try not to think about how fast her savings were evaporating. But then she heard it. A faint knock at the door. At first, she thought it was the wind. Then it came again, slow, hesitant, almost as if whoever was on the other side was unsure they should even be there. She opened the door just a crack and saw them. A man stood there, tall but exhausted, his hair dusted with snow. Beside him was a little girl, no more than 7, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her eyes, wide, shimmering, seemed to search Emily's face for an answer she didn't yet know how to give. We just need somewhere warm for the night," the man said, his voice low and strained. "The shelters are full. I'll pay you, I promise." Emily's first instinct was to hesitate. Her mother was asleep in the next room, the apartment was small, and she didn't know these people. But there was something about the little girl's trembling hands, the way she tucked the rabbit under her chin, that made the word no impossible. Without another thought, she stepped aside. "Come in." The heat from inside seemed to wrap around them instantly. The man closed the door quickly, brushing the snow from his coat, while the girl stood still, her eyes darting around the room as if memorizing it. Emily offered them blankets, setting a folded one gently over the girl's shoulders. She made a simple dinner, soup and bread, the kind you could stretch for 2 nights if you had to. The man thanked her quietly, his eyes never quite meeting hers, while the little girl whispered, "Thank you," as if the words themselves might melt away if spoken too loudly. When they finished eating, Emily noticed the man's hands. Calloused, with a faint mark on his wrist, like an old burned scar. He seemed to notice her looking and tucked his hands quickly into his pockets. The girl, however, reached into hers and pulled out something small, a bracelet made of thin silver wire, bent into the shape of a circle. "It's for you," she said softly, holding it out. "For letting us stay." Emily smiled, but the gesture lodged somewhere deep in her chest. She took it gently, feeling the cool metal against her skin. "It's beautiful. Did you make it?" The girl nodded once. "It's lucky." That night, Emily set up the couch with extra blankets. The man and his daughter curled up there, the girl resting her head against his chest, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Emily watched them for a moment before retreating to her room. Lying in bed, she stared at the bracelet in her hand. She didn't know why, but something about it felt different, as if it carried a story she couldn't yet see. And just before sleep claimed her, she thought she heard the man's voice in the living room. Low, careful, almost like a promise. "We're going to be all right now, Diane. We have to be." Emily didn't know then that this night, the night she opened her door to a stranger and his daughter, would change everything she thought she knew about kindness, fate, and who people really are. Emily woke to the sound of the kettle whistling. For a moment, she thought she had dreamt everything. The knock, the snow-covered strangers, the bracelet still resting on her nightstand. But when she stepped into the living room, the sight rooted her in reality. The man, still in the same clothes from last night, was standing by the sink, sleeves rolled up, quietly fixing the loose hinge on one of her cupboard doors. His daughter sat at the table, drawing on a scrap piece of paper with a dull pencil, her stuffed rabbit propped beside her as if it were watching. "Good morning," Emily said softly. The girl looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Miss Emily." It was the first time she had said her name, and something about the way it sounded, careful, almost reverent, made Emily's chest tighten. The man straightened, wiping his hands on a small handkerchief from his pocket. Thought I'd fix a few things before we go. The cupboard, the leaky tap, it's the least I can do. Emily waved a hand. You don't have to. But he was already kneeling by the sink, testing the faucet. The sound of running water echoed softly through the small kitchen. She made tea for all of them, the steam curling upward, filling the air with warmth that seemed to fight back the winter outside. They didn't talk much, just the occasional murmur from the girl as she drew, or the clink of the man's tools against the metal pipe. By late morning, the snow had eased. Sunlight spilled weakly through the window, making the frost on the glass glow. The man gathered their few belongings, a small, worn backpack and the girl's rabbit. He hesitated at the door. Thank you for everything. Emily only nodded. Somehow, your welcome felt too small for what had passed between them in just one night. When they left, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. She walked over to the table where the girl had been sitting and saw the drawing she had left behind. It was a simple scene, a small apartment, a steaming bowl on the table, 3 figures sitting together. Above them, in shaky, uneven letters, it read, "The first warm night." Emily tucked the paper into a drawer. She told herself it was just a kind gesture, something to smile at on a hard day. But deep down, it felt like she had been given something important, though she couldn't yet name what. The next few days were a blur of job applications, unanswered emails, and caring for her mother, whose breathing had grown more labored in the cold weather. The hospital bills were piling higher, the numbers on her bank account shrinking with each passing day. One afternoon, as she stood at the kitchen counter sorting through a stack of unopened envelopes, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Emily Carter, a professional-sounding voice asked. Yes, this is from Whitmore and Company headquarters. We'd like to invite you in for a meeting tomorrow morning. Your profile came highly recommended. Emily frowned. She hadn't applied to Whitmore and Company. In fact, they were far beyond her reach, a corporation that operated in skyscrapers she'd only ever walked past. Before she could ask more, the caller simply confirmed the time and hung up. Confusion lingered all evening. She checked her email, her messages, no application, no referral. And yet, someone had sent her name to one of the most prestigious companies in the city. That night, she picked up the silver wire bracelet from her nightstand, turning it slowly between her fingers. She didn't know why, but the thought of the little girl, Diane, kept returning. The way she had said, "It's lucky." The next morning, Emily dressed in her best, though best was a faded blouse and a skirt she had owned for years. She took the bus downtown, her breath fogging in the cold as she stared up at the towering glass building of Whitmore and Company. The lobby was vast, its marble floors polished to a mirror shine. She was escorted to the top floor, her steps echoing as they approached the largest office she had ever seen. The door opened, and there, standing behind a sleek mahogany desk, was the man from that snowy night, wearing a tailored suit, his hair perfectly in place, his eyes steady on hers. For a moment, Emily forgot how to breathe. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a flicker of something, recognition, gratitude, in his gaze. "Please," he continued, "have a seat. We have much to discuss." Emily's pulse quickened. She had no idea what was happening, only that the stranger she had let into her home was not at all who she thought he was. Emily lowered herself into the leather chair, her palms damp against the fabric of her skirt. The man, now no longer a snow-dusted stranger, but someone with an office that overlooked the entire city, watched her in silence for a moment, as if measuring what to say first. "My name," he began slowly, "is Matthew Cole. I'm the new CEO of Whitmore and Company." The words seemed to echo in the room. Emily tried to process them, but they felt like puzzle pieces that didn't yet fit. Matthew leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "I didn't tell you who I was that night because it didn't matter. What mattered was that you opened your door. You didn't ask for credentials. You didn't question if I could repay you. You just saw a father and daughter in the cold." Emily's mind spun. "Why am I here?" she finally asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He reached into a drawer and slid a folder across the desk. Inside were pages, her resume, yes, but also handwritten notes in a script she didn't recognize. Beside her name was a single line, "Compassion under pressure. Recommended without reservation." "I need someone like that here," Matthew said. "Someone who can make decisions that aren't just about numbers on a spreadsheet." Emily's instinct was to step back, to remind herself that she didn't belong in a place like this. But something in his expression, serious, almost urgent, kept her rooted. Over the next weeks, she found herself working under Matthew's direct guidance. The transition was dizzying, from cramped apartment to glass-walled boardrooms, from rationing groceries to handling accounts that could fund entire neighborhoods. And yet, she noticed something about Matthew that didn't fit the sharp edges of corporate life. He walked the floors of the company himself, speaking to employees by name. He paused to hold the elevator for interns. He listened. It wasn't long before she learned why. Late one evening, as the office emptied, she passed his door and saw him sitting alone in the dim light, Diane's stuffed rabbit on the corner of his desk. He told her then, in the same quiet tone he had used that first night, about the years before Whitmore. About losing his wife to an illness that moved faster than the doctors could fight. About the months afterward, when Diane had stopped speaking almost entirely, her world shrinking to the rabbit she carried everywhere. And about the winter evening when their car broke down in the snow, miles from any shelter, until they found her apartment light glowing in the dark. "You were the first person," he said, "who didn't look at me like I was a problem to solve or an inconvenience to avoid. You were just kind." Emily didn't know what to say, but she remembered the drawing Diane had left behind, the three of them at the table, and for the first time, she wondered if that night had meant as much to them as it had unexpectedly meant to her. But kindness, she learned, wasn't always met with gratitude in a place like this. Whispers began to follow her through the halls. She'd catch fragments as she passed. "Too close to the boss. Must be why she's here." Came out of nowhere. The words lodged deep, cold in a way winter never had been. One afternoon, as she returned from a meeting, she found an anonymous note on her desk. "Some of us worked years to get here. Enjoy your shortcut." She crumpled it, but the sting remained. Matthew noticed. "They don't know you yet," he said, "but they will." Still, she saw the strain in his face. Being the new CEO was one thing. Being the CEO who openly trusted an outsider was another. The tension reached a peak during the quarterly town hall meeting. The entire company crowded into the glass atrium, voices buzzing, eyes darting toward Emily as if waiting for something to happen. Midway through Matthew's address, a question came from the floor, sharp, deliberate. "Can you explain why someone with no corporate background is in a senior advisory position, especially when others here have been overlooked?" A murmur swept the room. Emily's stomach dropped. Matthew paused, scanning the crowd. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and held something up, a thin silver wire bracelet. "This," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "was given to me by my daughter the night a stranger let us into her home during a snowstorm. She gave it to our host because she believed it was lucky, and she was right. Because that night, I realized there are still people who choose compassion first, even when it costs them." He looked directly at Emily. "If I'm building a company worth working for, I want that kind of person beside me. That's why she's here." The room fell silent. Emily felt the weight of every gaze, some skeptical, some softened, but in that moment, she realized this was no longer just about her. It was about proving that kindness had a place even here. But even as the meeting ended and the tension eased, she could sense something else stirring beneath the surface. Not everyone in that room had been convinced. And in the days that followed, she began to see signs, small, subtle, that someone was waiting for her to fail. What she didn't know was that one of those people was closer than she could imagine, and that the night she opened her door was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The unease from the town hall lingered long after the applause faded. In the days that followed, Emily began to notice patterns. Files missing from her desk, emails she swore she had sent mysteriously vanishing, and meetings that were suddenly rescheduled without her knowledge. It wasn't paranoia, it was deliberate. And one morning, she saw the proof. She had arrived early to prepare for a client presentation, one Matthew had entrusted entirely to her. As she entered the empty boardroom, she found a printed email lying on the table. It was addressed to the client and signed with her name, but she hadn't written it. The message was curt, dismissive, exactly the kind of tone that could cost them the account. Her pulse hammered. Whoever had done this wasn't just undermining her, they wanted her gone. Before she could react, the door opened. Matthew stepped in, his eyes immediately going to the paper in her hands. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Emily explained quickly, expecting doubt, but instead saw his jaw tighten. I know who's behind this. Later that afternoon, he called a small internal meeting. The tension in the room was thick as he played the building's security footage, grainy but clear enough to show a senior manager slipping into Emily's office late the previous night. The room fell silent. The manager, pale, tried to stammer an excuse, but Matthew cut him off. This company will not be a place where sabotage is rewarded. We're better than that, or we will be. He turned to Emily. Finish your presentation. And she did. She delivered it with steady hands and clear conviction, the client nodding in agreement by the time she finished. The deal closed within the week, one of the largest the company had seen in months. That Friday evening, as the office emptied and the winter sky deepened to indigo, Matthew asked her to walk with him. They left the skyscraper behind, the city's noise fading as they reached the quieter streets by the waterfront. The air was sharp, but not biting like that night months ago. Street lamps spilled golden light across the snow-dusted path. I've been meaning to tell you something, Matthew began. That night you let us in, you didn't just give us warmth. You gave Diane a reason to believe people could still be safe. She'd been quiet for so long after her mother passed. But when we left your place, she told me, I think Miss Emily is my lucky star. Emily's throat tightened. She's a remarkable little girl. She is, Matthew agreed. But she's remarkable because of moments like that. Moments that show her the world isn't all loss. He paused, then pulled something from his coat pocket. It was the bracelet. The same thin silver wire, shaped into a circle, but now it glimmered faintly in the lamplight. Polished, the edges smoothed. I kept it because it reminded me of that night, he said. But I think it's time it came back to where it belongs. Emily hesitated, then took it, feeling the familiar cool metal against her skin. The weight of it was different now, not heavier, but fuller. They walked in silence for a moment, the snow crunching softly under their boots. Then Matthew stopped, turning to face her fully. I don't know what the future holds for the company. For me. For us, he said.